like to tell the journey of my relationship education. And it began with me acknowledging that if my role models were my parents, and if they made themselves miserable most of the time, that I didn't have a template to copy. And so I went and built a business and built several houses and learned life skills with a thought that by age 30, I should have that down and would then be able to begin what seemed like a much more challenging thing, which was to navigate effective relationships. Now, at age 26, a few years ahead of schedule, I met a 58-year-old woman who was attracted to me and initiated. And the question was whether to proceed ahead of schedule and have a first relationship. And my analysis was that if, after talking with her and learning that she had spent time with a good 100 male lovers, my thought was that should count for something, because if I clearly did not know what I was doing, and I think it's rather odd in our culture that without a single hour of formal education and often terrible role models, we somehow imagine that this highly dimensional, multidimensional thing called a relationship, in which two minds, often very independent and stubborn minds, I might add, if you live in the United States, two minds, two hearts, often different cultures and family backgrounds, and two bodies and two logistics are all going to just magically click. That seems about as unlikely as a 747 just magically taking off, flying the right distance for the amount of fuel in its tank, and landing again, just right off the bat, because it's a lot easier to imagine that happening when you consider the fact that the wings on the 747 don't have feelings. The wings on the 747 don't have a time of month at which they become rebellious, and the key moment you need to land, they say, I don't want to participate, and the thing crashes. Because what are you going to do if your wing flaps have no interest in a graceful landing? They have more interest in a temper tantrum at a critical moment. And so understanding that, I put a lot of weight on the fact that she'd actually had some measure of success with 100 men before. Now, I also would note that it wasn't stunningly successful since she didn't stick around with any one of them for very long. And that's, of course, relevant because if two people can create a stunning, sustainable meaning it does a lot for both people, so much so that it's worth the effort. If two people are successful at creating a relationship that does a lot more for both people than they can do on their own or with other people, you do not end that relationship. That's not intelligent. So I stepped into that relationship, and the technology that I developed as I entered that relationship was twofold. The first one is what I call scripting. And the purpose of this technology was that while I didn't know the language to articulate it at the time, I knew on some level that I am a sensitive, meaning that I don't like fighting. I don't like conflict, and my style of leadership is relatively quiet. My partner, however, was a dominant personality that could be bullying. And if a bully and a sensitive come together, the bully will always dominate through stimulation, meaning the sensitive, at a certain level of overstimulation, will do just about anything to stop the stimulation. It's kind of like volume on a stereo. If someone keeps turning up the volume of the stereo and at some point it becomes so painful that you are literally being driven crazy, you will do whatever it takes to get away or get the volume turned down. Now, the person who is more sensitive in relationship feels the pain of that volume turning up first, sometimes 200 to 300% more than a non-sensitive. And what that allows a non-sensitive to do is turn up the volume to a level that is not very painful for them, but is very painful for the sensitive, and basically dictate terms. It's going to be my way, or I don't turn the volume down. And that can be the volume of shouting, that can be the volume of intimidation, that can be the volume of aggressive looks, because to a sensitive, these things are exaggerated. And so, knowing this about my partner, it was very obvious from the first few hours we spent together. She was bossy and assertive and not terribly sensitive. So I created the technology of scripting because I didn't want to be in a situation where, for example, she'd say, let's go for a drive. Sounds good. We're halfway out on the drive and she wants to have her music at her volume. And I don't like the music. And I don't like the volume. Well, in an enactment of that spontaneously, she has all the leverage because she wanted the drive, she wants the music, and she wants the volume. And she's got the tool of domination or bullying at her back because it works. It works very well when you have a non-sensitive and a sensitive. And so I knew this would be unhealthy because the natural thing is, of course, to leave that relationship. But it was potentially a very good relationship. However, to balance the power in those types of dynamics without conflict, which would have been a lose for me. In other words, the conflict itself is overstimulating. What I did is I would say, okay, you want to go for a drive, so let's talk this through. And before entering an engagement, I would say, okay, so let's kind of go through the scenario. So let's say I'm a bit tired or hungry. Do you want to go on this drive in a way where we go back when you're ready to go back? Or shall we say that the first person to be tired or hungry sets the return course home without discussion? What would you like? And how about the music? Shall we say that it's silence unless both people like the music? Or do you have a particular music and sound? And so this would force the choices into the present, and I would then say yes or no, or negotiate by saying, well, I'd happily go on a drive for you if all I have to do is raise a finger and there's no discussion and we go to silence, or all I have to do is say, I'm ready to go back now, and there isn't a debate. That's the guidelines, that's the operating system for the event, so to speak. And in this way, I was able to have an equal power dynamic in a way that would not happen without that technology. And this made the relationship so effective that It avoided, 98% of fights, which would have been a deal breaker for me if those 98% of fights hadn't been avoided, particularly as my partner enjoyed fighting and I did not. Now, the second technology that I created was a little bit similar. It was a scripting of the ending, meaning once it was clear that we had a conflict brewing, one, and two, that conflict wasn't really ideal. For me, what I suggested is that we have a discussion at a counseling meeting about the pros and cons of ending, which we did and we agreed to end, with the counselor's support and encouragement of the ending. Now, next, we had two businesses together, and the businesses had about 200 assets that we had purchased together. And I knew this would be another conflict point. And so what I suggested is that we flip a coin to see who would go first. Whoever went first would pick the first asset based on sentimentality or how useful they thought it would be. The next person would pick the next asset. The next person would pick the next asset until all assets were picked. Step one. Step two would be we would then add up the amounts that we had paid for each asset. And if someone had picked more of the expensive ones and the other person had not, and let's say someone had picked $2,000 more of assets than the other person, then the other person would write a check for the difference. And so the person who had picked the most expensive assets would bring it to an even point with cash, basically. And so she agreed to that, and in an hour, we had divided all of our assets. And so this was a successful beginning, a successful relationship, and very importantly, a successful ending. And this was important for a couple of reasons. One is we still continued to do business together, just with separate assets, because it was amicable, number one. Number two was we actually had another relationship 3 or so years later after I had a lot more experience, and it was a success as well. Though on that occasion, she did not honor our agreement on how we would end the relationship, and so it's created more of a cautious reserve. We don't have an active relationship right now because she violated that agreement. And one of my guidelines is don't begin relationships with people that you don't want to end them with, that you would not enjoy ending them with. And this is for a very logical reason. If I look back at what is now 100 lovers that I've spent time with, I'm only spending time with one, my wife, right now. That means 99% of all my relationships, that's actually not entirely true. I'm in dialogue with another lover in the past, but so that means 98. So there's a 98% statistical chance in this case that these relationships will end. But there is no guarantee whatsoever that they will end well. There's just a high probability that they will end. Now, if you know that there's an 80, 90, whatever your percentage is based if you look at all the people you've spent time with in your life, and where are they all now? If you've spent time with 500 people, 100 people, friends, lovers, and what percentage are you in active engagement with? That's the statistical probability that the relationship you're in now is going to end, statistically. Now, if I know that there's a 98% chance that the relationship that I'm in now, for some reason other than death, meaning none of my lovers died on me, for some reason other than death, is going to end, the next obvious question is, do I want a great ending? Do I want it to be ethical? Do I want it to be kind? Do I want it to be for good reasons? Do I want it to be with a trustworthy person? Or do I want it to be a surprise attack, a betrayal, a shitty... What do I want? Well, I did a lot of watching of women. And almost every woman that I've talked to has nightmare horror stories about breakup processes. Now, there has not been a single woman that I've talked to that has an ending protocol that they consciously have thought about, and most importantly of all, have included their partner in. So there are a few women that I've met in the United States that have actually thought, like, well, usually they've just thought about what they don't like. You don't break up with someone with a text. Well, why the hell not? If you don't take the time to communicate a preference when you've got a 90% plus probability that it will happen, and it's happened bad before, why would it change this time if you do nothing different? You see, that doesn't make any sense. So there are some women that have talked about what they don't like, but I've never met the woman attracted to me in all 100 cases that said, Dane, there's a good chance we're going to end at some point, and so let's just give it a little thought. I haven't met that woman. So I don't want to be the cause of someone fuming 2 years later that I didn't end in the right way for her, that she didn't bother to tell me. And so what I do is I ask, what would be a great ending for you? And I tell a partner, what would be a great ending for me? And this makes a lot of difference. It makes a lot of sense as well. It makes a difference. And I'm going to tip this just slightly like this. There we go. And so I utilize that technology, and what I find is a little bit of a pattern over time is that there's a certain number of women that say, what a great idea. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for your kindness and your thought for doing this. Now, this is a woman who is going to be great to end a relationship with. Now, there are other women that say, what do you mean? What do you mean? Are you planning on dumping me? And this person is not necessarily going to be a great ending partner. Particularly, I meet some women who attracted, and I just say, I'm very attracted. I would love if our relationship lasted for the rest of our lives. That would be great for both of us, because if it does, it means that we did an amazing job and we're very compatible. I mean, I don't think that many people want good relationships to end. I mean, people may have given up on the hypothesis that there are good relationships and notice that they seem to go sour after a week, and so they'd like them to end for a week because they don't want to go sour again. But I don't think there's anyone that says, I could be 10 times happier with you than anyone else in the world. I'd love to get rid of you a week later. I mean, there may be a few people like that, but obviously not terribly intelligent. So in that sense, it's a very kind partnering, and it's kind in a way that takes a little bit of thought, because it's a little bit difficult to have that conversation when you're really excited about someone. and yet it's showing kindness in the future, and there's a thoughtfulness there. So this takes me up unto the point when I took some seminars at the Human Awareness Institute in Northern California. And what I learned in the first workshop was how to do scripting even better, because the entire workshops were long scripts. And I could see the greater potential. In other words, there were so many recipes for engaging that I hadn't explored that the workshops brought to my attention. And so I took scripting to a new level in response to observing how organic and deep places, very feminine places, were created by very masculine scripts, working with time very precisely, working with rhythm very precisely, taking turns, etc. And so I took scripting to a new level as a result of observing that. I also learned a couple of powerful tools. I learned requests, stated boundaries. I learned to define my 100%, which is a beautiful technology of understanding what complete bliss, what complete love, etc. looks like for you and for me. And then being able to translate that, digitize it into words, so it's not just saying, make me feel great, which I guess is a start, but I mean, who doesn't want to feel great? And the key thing is not, do you want me to make you feel great? Very few people would say, no, I'd rather be miserable. But how do you do it? What's the temperature? What's the color? What's the volume? What's the ambiance? What's the music? What's the clothing? What's the rhythm? What's the pressure point that makes you feel great? Because if you can digitize, take that wave emotion, feeling great, and turn it into 3 ounces of sugar, 6 bits of cinnamon, 2 units of heat, a little bit of oil, and then that's my favorite cookie. You see, it takes a digitization of the emotion in order to replicate it, in order to coach someone on how to succeed. So I learned this at the Human Awareness Institute workshops. Requests, boundaries. This is my boundary, just so you know. And I remember up in the warm pool at Harbin Hot Springs, what looked like a gay man was kind of coming in, you know, and etc. And I didn't mind the conversation. I just wanted to let him know that I'm not gay and I wasn't open for his advances. And so I just said, you know, just to let you know, I think you're gay, yes. Well, I'm not, and so, you know, this is the boundary. And so if you want to have this conversation itself in the context of knowing, you know, what my agenda is, fine, but I don't want to just have it under this mystique of you wondering if you're going to get laid. So what do you think? And he said, thank you, you know, thank you so much for the clarity, for the directness, etc. And so there's flow there. Now, so this requests, boundaries, asking for one's 100%, asking other people for their 100%. I also, a safe sex conversation was another tool learned at the Human Awareness Institute, where, you know, what's your sexual experience? When were you last tested for STDs? What were the test results? How many partners have you spent time with, unprotected and protected, since then? Did you have any conversation with them about that? And what are your safe sex protocols? So very useful sexual technology around that, particularly in an environment which at high there is a lot of one-night stands. And so, you know, you'd hate to have a lifelong virus from someone you spent an hour with, and so, you know, that's a useful technology. Now, this brought me up to a point where I was able to ask for what I wanted. And the issue was that within the United States, what I wanted, and I actually learned from the book, The 5 Love Languages, what I wanted most was spontaneous quality time and to put the relationship first. And I wanted that sustainable quality time to include a spacious 4 hours a day. Now, the typical American, I learned, the typical Bay Area woman, wants to see me about 10 hours a week for sex and a movie and dinner, and is incredibly passive about escalating intimacy to all kinds of areas, whether it's their love languages, their ending agreements, their hopes and dreams, their bucket. It's a very passive type of dynamic. And the partnering level is very low. Partnering is, what would your ideal relationship look like? Well, this is my ideal relationship. Well, we've got overlap in 30%. We've got compromise capacity to 58%. And then there's this remaining bit that this 42% where we just do not connect. So since we now know we don't connect in this area, how can we partner to support you beyond the lust of attachment and to actually create your well-being? You see, and so this was then a new technology, and what this did is it took me in the domain of polyamory. Because knowing that I wanted to spend a good 4 hours plus spaciously and spontaneously every day, and one woman after another wanted this 1 night, 2 night, maybe 3 nights a week kind of scenario with weekends thrown in from time to time. By having 3 lovers and this 100% and communicating up front and safe sex, etc., it created or simulated one really meaningful, valuable relationship where I would be spending, 40 hours a week with someone in effective, healthy relationship. And that was a powerful tool to help confirm that, yes, I was most happy seeing someone in that guise. Now, taking me into the realm of polyamory created an interesting energetic dynamic, because until that point, the asymmetries in a relationship that I would experience were always one-sided. For example, I would want to spend more time with this lover than they would want to spend with me. That would be a dynamic that might go on with one lover. Or someone else might like to go out to movies more than I wanted to go out to movies. Or someone else drank. So there's asymmetry. Someone drinks more than the other. Someone likes movies more than the other. Someone likes horror movies and I don't, whatever. Now, what I found interesting as relationships opened up into threesomes or foursomes, not with the women meeting each other, with conscious agreements and complete transparency, but not meeting each other, was a very interesting dynamic, because if I was more emotionally needy with partner A, so in the partner A dynamic, I'm more emotionally needy. What I would find is with partner B, she would be more emotionally needy with me. And so there was a way that the third point in the relationship left me in the middle, and I would see dynamics happening from both sides of the spectrum simultaneously. So I'm more needy to this person than they are to me, and then invariably partner number 2 is more needy of me than I am of her. And what this gave me was empathy and perspective about what it's like to be on the other side. This was similarly the case when I noticed when gay men were pursuing me sexually, and I'm, of course, not interested, I found myself in states of high anxiety that seemed irrational, meaning, what's the big deal? Just say no. And yet, I just couldn't relax knowing, that in a certain sense I was disappointing this gay man whose, peak joy of the night would be that this and this and this would conclude with him sticking his dick up my ass. And that awareness of pressure gave me a very interesting insight because, as a man with women, I'm able to, look at a woman and within less than 3 seconds have a sense of whether I would enjoy some facet of sexuality with her or not. Now, this 3 seconds is digesting a lot. It's digesting her energy, her demeanor, 5 to 10 different probability fields. It's imagining 5 or 10 different scenarios and saying, this part of her and this part of me would definitely enjoy sex together. And I could make this part of her happy, and this part of me could do it, and that would be fun. So a lot of it for me is, can I make the woman happy with who I am, physically, emotionally, mentally, etc.? And if the answer is yes, it's a great joy to make a woman happy. The other question is, of course, is she going to hurt me? The vulnerable, the feminine in me. Is she going to honor? Is she going to hurt me? Now, if she's not going to hurt me as a probability field, meaning she's not highly aggressive and condescending or whatever it is, not highly bitchy and all that, then there's an opening. And if I can see some way to make her happy, and all of that takes less than 3 seconds, and it is highly influenced in the first half hour, meaning, she can, toss scorn my way and kill it, or, open up further, or show more kindness that I didn't see initially, and that is very interesting. And so that can change, but there's that dynamic. And I never want to have sex with a woman who doesn't want to have sex with me. But if I think I can make her happy, and this is just in the abstract because, for example, I'm married in a monogamous relationship, and so this is all, completely off the table. But in the abstract, that's fun. There's a aliveness. Like, yes, I could make someone happy. I could feel a rush doing it. Adrenaline would flow. Ideas would come into being. Orgasms, and stuff would happen, and this is exciting. And so, very fast. And occasionally I practiced, in terms of asking for my 100% and stuff, learned it high. I would say, I find you very attractive, and, if it's of interest to you, I would enjoy being sexual with you. And I would see some women literally freeze. And I'd always be like, why are you freezing? It's no, just say no if you don't want to. But I want you to take this as a compliment, that I see something amazing about you, some way we could connect. I want you to take this as a compliment. But I couldn't control that they didn't take it as a compliment. And this was maddening. And it wasn't until I experienced this gay thing, coming at me. And it's like, well, why can't I just take it as a compliment and just enjoy the fact that they would like to make me happy? And I couldn't. So this was very fun because I thought it would be so easy. Why are women making it so hard? And I thought it would be so easy, and it was very hard. I couldn't do it. So then that gave me empathy for for women, and this, split where, what I might offer it and intend as a compliment and creates fear and pressure, and what someone else might offer me as a compliment and creates fear and pressure. So this was a great learning. I also learned that my 100% doesn't exist seeking my 100%. So what do I mean by that? I mean that I spent time with 100 women. I spent time all over the world, and I never met my 100%. And I met my 100% physical lover. Amazing. 3-4 times every day for months having sex, and some of the most amazing. I could not ask for a more amazingly delightful, passionate response. I would be tired. Even if it existed, it wouldn't do me any good, So, but she was Catholic. And she thought my gay friends would go to hell. And she was incredibly simple-minded in her dogmas of this and that and the other. And she didn't put the relationship above real estate. She really thought that real estate was more important than this kind of relationship. And she didn't like that I'm unique. She kept trying to say, if you could just dress and do and like this, you'd be normal. And I'd be like, I don't want to be normal. That's not a compliment. That's not what I'm aspiring to. I'm aspiring to be intelligent. And I love the areas I diverge from the culture. And so she was terrible in some of these areas. And then I met the woman who was great in those areas and who didn't give me an erection. And I met the person, with the perfect body, just amazing body. But what's the good of a perfect body if you can't communicate and and then the perfect, correspondent, the perfect giver of gifts, the perfect artist, the perfect business partner, the perfect metaphysician, the perfect person into personal growth, the perfect logistical person. I have met them all. I've just never met them in one person. Until now. And I'll go into that a little bit later. Now, I also learned that to connect with my feminine side in a way that was deeply honoring and honored, it was better to be in Europe than in the United States. Copenhagen is a good place. Italy. And it's even better to be in Asia. Philippines, Thailand. Thailand is the best in a number of ways culturally. Philippines is the best in many ways responsiveness and sensitivity. And this is a very important learning because, for example, I could write a one-page Craigslist or whatever online profile that would go into, I want to spend 4 hours a day with someone, the things that actually bring a relationship to life for me. And I might send out 100 emails. And of those 100 emails in the US, 6 people would respond. 2 people would say, in response to a page, what do you mean about this? And that's it. It's not thanks for writing, it's like, wow, I guess I'm talking to a machine here. And a couple might say, well, that seems unreasonable. And then some say, well, maybe we could talk in a month or two. I'm busy right now, or things like that. And it's and not a single person is, wow, that's exactly what I'm looking for, and let's meet, and da da da, and how about tomorrow, and let's connect. Now, that's the United States. Now, in Denmark, the responsiveness will be about 150% to 300% higher, similar in Italy. Now, the response in Thailand will be 500 to 800% higher, and the response in the Philippines will be about 1,500% higher in responsiveness. Now, it's a different dynamic, and so it's important to learn through. But what I learned, essentially, is that for a given type of relationship, whatever that type is, it is much easier in a given country or culture than in another given country and culture, and that if you want a relationship style that is completely different than your country's kind of optimal style, and we're going to get another battery here. Blank and new battery. Then it pays to go to the location where what you want is in abundance. And so for me, it became a tension between relative abundance in Thailand. But I ran into a little bit more of that time pressure because the Thais are so industrious and hardworking that the typical Thai woman works 6 days a week. Now, even in a framework of working 6 days a week, a typical Thai woman will have time that evening for a dinner, for an outing, for a moonlight swim, etc. Now, that's way better than the email me next week. Let's, you spend more time emailing and texting in the United States than actually meeting. And then you don't know who you're meeting because you can't tell from a text what's going on. So it's very valuable to get an immediate sense, are we connected? Now, there's other downsides to Thailand. There's a thing called sinsot. And what this means is, for example, when I came close to marrying a Thai woman, I learned on the way to her house, to my surprise, that I would have to buy her from her father for $30,000, and that this was a touchy area, and if I, wasn't extra generous and stuff, that this would dishonor the family. Well, it's a great system for the Thais. It's just not what I had in mind when I would need an additional $100,000 to manage the visa, the wedding, her car, in the U.S. and her immigration. And why do I want an extra $30,000 right at the point when all that's hitting the fan? I don't. And this was, one of the deal breakers in that dynamic. So, pros and cons. No one in Thailand literally and to a large extent, speaks English. It's a big problem. But they're honest and they're magnificent human beings. And courteous, it's just such a beautiful culture. I love spending time in Thailand. And so that's that. My wife is Filipino, and people speak English. And it's partly an economic thing, where there's usually at least 15% of the population who's unemployed. Well, these people have quality time. And I don't want to fly an 18-hour flight in order to stay cooped up in a hotel and see someone every Sunday. nor am I going to be promiscuous. I've never lied to a woman. I've never cheated on a woman. I do not intend to. This is something that I learned about love, meaning I'm not talking about lust, and so this is a valuable distinction. There's a couple of different forms of what are commonly referred to as love, and they're often mixed up. And the first one is attachment, and this is I need you. Okay, great, I need you. Doesn't mean you need me. It doesn't mean you want to be needed. It could mean you're quite smothered by my need. I need you. It's about me. I want to fuck you. It's about me. Doesn't mean you want to have sex. Doesn't mean you feel. It means I want to connect with you in that way. This is about me. I feel happy around you. I feel joy in your presence. I like who you are. That's about me, you see? I'm attached to you. I don't want you to do this and this and this. It usually ties in with, need, etc. That's about me. I want this for you. I imagine this. That's about me. You see, these are all about me. Now, but there's one form of love that is what I call mature love. And it's the only love that's about you. And it works like this, simply. I want to behave and be in a way that helps you be your best self, that supports you in going where you want to go, and that dovetails, because some of us have very sick recipes for love from abusive childhood, etc. And so, tie me up, hang me from a thing, use me. Okay, I get that turns you on. It's not necessarily loving to do that any more than it's necessarily loving to give someone a coke overdose or whatever. May feel good in the moment, but is it taking you towards a life that lets you be your best self? So there is a discipline to this, and the discipline I think that's relevant is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is my behavior helping you feel secure in your future and well-being? Your needs. Am I behaving in a way that destroys your ability to meet your needs, etc.? As in quit your job that's paying all your bills and run away and go into debt, Well, that's undermining your security and your survival. So you have every human being in the history of humankind, as Abraham Maslow has discovered in research, needs to survive, needs to feel secure in that survival. And once those two are met, needs to have a sense of love and belonging. They belong and they feel loved. They love them. And it has a sense of self-esteem and self-respect. So if I engage in a way that helps you increase your sense of survival, increase your security in your survival, feel safe, have a sense of love and belonging, and increase your sense of self-esteem, I'm being loving to you. Now, that could be avoiding sex because I'm distracting you from your grades, or it could be being a friend, or it could be holding you really close and giving you a place to sleep when you lose this, or a backup plan. What helps you climb in your hierarchy of human needs, A, respects you, your boundaries and preferences, B, and responds to the way you do and do not want to engage. In other words, if you're being loving to someone and you say, how can I engage in the way that's best for you? And they say, I'm swamped. The best thing you could do is disappear. And you say, done, and off you go. That's being loving. It's responding. It's the only form of love that is completely about the other person. And so it's the mature love from a place of abundance. This is a natural love when you are confident and secure in all your needs being met, in all your sex and sexual gratification being met. And you see something you want to support and honor in another person. It's like, how can I be loving to you? And you just listen. And your joy is seeing the happiness and watching them become and grow. This is a mature love. I mentioned I'm only in contact, with my wife, my present lover, and one other. I really love this other woman. And she's getting married. She's moving to, and doesn't have enough money for the wedding, and so I'm helping her grow as a human being. I'm helping her survive, and that's bringing me joy. And I couldn't do this. I tried when, when I wasn't fully satisfied. But as someone who is so grateful to have found my wife and is completely satisfied sexually and emotionally, and I can be generous from a place of abundance with my former lover. And so this is a mature love. Now, it's not puritanical in the sense that you can be loving to someone and still feel lust. You can feel loving and feel attachment. But the pivot point is if someone says, what I really need right now is for you just to disappear or not show any sexual interest to me, and and your primary interest is in making them happy in that area and accommodating them, then your primary love is a mature love, even if you might want to have sex or whatever. If your primary interest, you'd like them to be happy, but your primary interest is, I just got to fuck you, well, you're primarily in the adolescent love or the child's need or whatever it is. And, if there's no conflict, you can be loving. But if sex is withheld, you're going to manipulate, lie, do whatever it takes to get your need. Well, that's an immature love. And so this is a distinction I didn't learn. And a lot of these things are what I didn't learn at High. Now, I also learned through my wife that to really find the deepest loves, it wasn't actually about searching and finding all around the world my 100%. In fact, when I met my wife, I was absolutely clear that she could do nothing for me. Of course, I was an idiot, but I was very clear about that. So then why meet her at all? And the answer was simple. I thought maybe I could be of some service. That's it. And so on our first date, being aware that I'd already ruled her out and all that, I said, how can I help? What do you need? What's going on? She gave me 5 problems in her life. I said, do this, 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 and this. If you do them and you want to talk more, shoot me an email. And off she went. Well, she improved all those things. She enjoyed it. She sent some more issues. And I gave her some more suggestions. And how can I be of service? How can I be of service? Well, I watched this woman just take off like a rocket. I'd never seen anyone grow like this and like this. And, and it was so fun to see someone grow like that. I mean, I just was in awe of her humility. She'd be working 4 to sometimes 6 hours a day, doing yoga, doing inner child meditations, reading this book, doing this. And, her life was taking off. And it was fun to watch this. And after, some time, I noticed this is the most fun thing in my whole life, is watching her blossom as a human being. And I'm so honored. I mean, I'm just so touched by who she is. And the honor of being able to participate in that. And that's when I very cautiously opened up the doorway. I said, I'm just thrilled to participate in in your life. And as long as you want to grow like this, I'm here. But if you think it might be a good thing for you, and you understand that it's probably not going to last statistically and all that. It's, and you understand that I'm not going to marry you and anything. But if you want to be lovers and spend some time and grow like this together, we can. And if you don't want to, or you don't want to deal with the heartbreak of a probable breakup and stuff, we can just grow like this. And I just want you to know it's, I think you're a neat person, and you do what's good for you. And I was very kind of sideways on this in terms of not pushing, because I wanted it to be about her and what was good for her. And to my great delight at that point, because as I say, she was the most enjoyable human being in her dynamic growth and presence and courage, and just so beautiful to see. She said, yes, she would love to get together. And 3 days later, I was flying to the Philippines, and she took 2 weeks off work. So our first date was 2 weeks. Our first date. Well, I guess it was our second date, though. The first dinner meeting we had, she had a chaperone, which is typical in Philippines, and I think we barely hugged, if anything, at the end, and it's just very, very distant, and just confirming my opinion that nothing was going on. And so that growth rate has continued to a point that we're now 27 months into the relationship, and she has grown more than 4,000%. In other words, if you look at, whether it's learning to swim, learning to write, learning to do yoga, you take all the different metrics of change and you look at the percentage of growth in each one. So, going from just comfortable yoga, etc., starting off 10%, 20%, now 300% better in yoga, and going from barely being able to flail around in the water to being comfortable surfing, etc. And what's the growth rate there, and the growth rate in business, and the growth rate here. You just look at these blossoming points, and 4,000%. Mentally, emotionally, physically, economically. It's just so fun being around that kind of vitality and beauty. So she's growing into way more of my 100% than I've ever met or dreamed possible, certainly with, when we first met. And so that's also, an important pivot for me to understand that I'm marrying the first person I asked, how could I serve you to be your best self? And who said yes to that in a big way. And I didn't marry, the 100 women who I pursued, like, are you good enough to be my 100%? My 100% conversationalist, my 100% you've already got all your own money, 100% you've got all your free time, you like this, you're like that, understand these, you can. My 100% just didn't happen. And it was very disappointing, because in the Human Awareness Institute, it was if, you just ask for your 100% and, one day you receive it. And it's like after 10,000 asks and 100 lovers and da-da-da-da-da, it's like, it's not coming. What's going on? And so it was a real surprise to pivot and realize the real joy for me was in taking a stand for another human being and making a difference in their life and being of service. And even bigger surprise for me to realize that all the gifts that I thought I was giving to her, I was giving to myself. I bought her a dog. I've always wanted a dog. I just never got around to it. I bought her a dog suddenly. We're living together and I have a dog. I wanted her to have the most comfortable home. I invited her to live with me. I usually keep separate houses because it keeps the relationship more conscious. If every morning when you wake up, you think, do I want to spend time with this lover or not? You stop asking that question when you're living together, because it's an irrelevant question. If you're living separately, You wake up in the choice, what would I most enjoy doing together? As soon as the question is not to spend time with your partner, you know there's something up and you can deal with it. As long as the answer is, I'd love to be with my sweetheart, and you have to make an effort to get together, it keeps the relationship conscious, alive, and alerts you that it's doing well. You lose that indicator when you just wake up and you're stuck together and you don't even bother asking whether you want to be together or not. But I gave that to her, and I'm discovering just how enjoyable it is to live with someone like her. So this was an important thing, being of service. Now, I would not have succeeded without a very dark detour, courtesy of the Human Awareness Institute facilitators, who facilitate the workshops, and who took me through a psychedelic session which was sexualized and then buried and then stonewall, like this never happened, and pushed and kept secret. Took me into my darkest pain, loneliness, grief, physical exhaustion, adrenal collapse, etc. Took me deep into trauma. Brought up old childhood memories of much more trauma. And literally had me flat on my back for years. Now, I met Jan a little like 18 months after that. And I had come close to dying, into addiction to manage the pain. And I measured what the facilitators did wrong. They didn't attune. They kept things secret. They didn't ask questions, so they could attune. They ignored my coaching. I said I needed this, they would slam hard the other way. They didn't apologize. They put more emphasis on keeping their workshops having a pristine reputation than actually telling the truth and keeping their people safe. Now, every single thing they did wrong hurt me and my body and my psyche immensely. And so I had the time living in that pain to analyze exactly what they were doing that was so destructive. And so this is why when I met Jen, the second woman I spent time with after this abuse cycle, I didn't ask for my 100%. I asked how I could be of service, in part because I had more understanding of what she was dealing with. And I also understood that I had to ask, I had to apologize, I had to do the opposite of what the facilitators had and were doing to me if I wanted to have the opposite impact. And so, very fortunately, in this journey, I had met a stranger in a cafe who recommended a book on trauma, who I honored by ordering the book on trauma on the spot, downloading it on the spot, reading it that day, and discovering that I had PTSD, that I had trauma, which I didn't know and didn't have language for, understanding the biology of trauma. And so this now gave me a language to communicate that in a way that had sabotaged. I realized that every single one of my relationships prior had had one to another degree of trauma in it. And then in many cases it was mutual trauma, meaning I had traumatized them and they had traumatized me, and neither of us had language or tools to navigate around the trauma. So I then understood why so many of my relationships were failing. And I had a vocabulary to talk about them. And I also then had technology with which to work with them. And so you can see symptoms of trauma on people's faces and body language very clearly if you have eyes. Well, I now had eyes. And it was not too difficult because I'd seen the symptoms, and I knew something was off in a number of my lovers in a big way, but I didn't have a language to tell them, what was going on, and they didn't have a language and all that. So I learned about trauma. And so before I got together with my sweetheart, Jen, as a lover, I asked her to write out 30, 40 pages on all the most significant events of her life, positive and negative, and how they'd affected her and what was going on. And I looked at the pattern, and it was as if all the forces, her church, her parenting, her country, her culture, had all knocked her off center at a 45-degree angle. Well, this angle is not only not symmetrical, it takes a lot of energy to maintain a posture at this angle. Just try holding a body at 45 degrees. It's easy to hold it at center. It's hard to hold it here. So I understood she's in a lot of stress, psychically, physically, emotionally. And I have to, if I want to relate to this woman, I cannot push her in this direction or she'll fall over. I've got to push her in this direction till she gets centered. Well, I now knew what the pattern was because she was kind enough to tell me. And she was the first woman who was kind enough to lay that out. I'd asked many women, and so she wrote that out, and that gave me a sense of if I was to be loving to her, here's how I would need to be, and here's how I would need to not be. And so I knew what to apologize for when I made a mistake. I knew where things needed to go. And when people are abused when they're young, they have an internalized abuser when they're older that pushes them and punishes them for being healthy and pushes them towards the abuse. So I needed to know when to fight her in that, which usually was whenever she would blame herself. I would fight her because I'd look at it analytically, and she was often the only innocent in the party, but she'd take full responsibility for any blame when she was the only healthy one there. And that would include with me, meaning if I was out of line, she would try to apologize as if somehow she was out of line. And so I'd need to fight her on that and say, no. You haven't, I would go through it, action by action, that you are not out of line. You did this right, you did this right, you did this right, and then I did this wrong. How does that make you responsible? That doesn't make any sense. Why aren't you angry at me rather than at yourself? Because if you want to be angry at someone, I'm the one that did this. So let's reroute this. And it's healthy for you to be angry about this or that or the other. There's nothing wrong with your anger. It's just when you're abused, when you're young, you learn that if you express your anger at your abuser, you get hit even harder. Well, this creates a big responsibility for this type of terrain, and I knew I had that responsibility, and I would need to hold that seriously, and we've grown because I've honored that. As I say, I've never lied, I've never cheated with a partner, and the reason for that in one way is back to being loving. I talked about the difference between selfish love and mature love. But I want to talk about the difference between projection and reality. And what I mean by that is if you love me or are attracted to me because you project that I would do X, Y, and Z in this situation based on your projection, and you love me because of that, if that's an accurate projection, and I would do that, and that is me, and then you're loving me. But if you're loving me because of a projection that actually isn't me, and I've tested a lot of lovers over time who say things like, oh, I just trust you, or wow, I love you. And I say, well, what do you love? And they'd say, well, it's this and this. And I'd say, but where did you get that? That's not what I do. You're not loving me. You're loving who you think I am. Well, one of the reasons I always tell the truth is that I don't want or feel that it's particularly real if someone accepts me, loves me, supports me because they don't know the reality. But if they know everything, and that's one of the reasons I like spending 4 hours a day with someone, there's absolutely no way to encapsulate a complex multidimensional life in a few hours a week. There is absolutely no way for someone not to know major things about me at that distance. Major things. And I'm not going to spend those 2 hours a week cramming just so that they do. If someone wants to know me in the full range of positives and negatives in this arena and that arena, etc., it takes time. If you don't want to spend that time, the cost is into me you don't see. There's no intimacy. And so it's hard to call it real love when what you're doing in your mind is you're filling in the gaps of what you don't know with what you think you know. But I have a lot of polarities. I have a lot of extremes. And so you can't just say that because you saw me happily cooking those 2 hours that I'm happily cooking all the time. You can't even say I'm in that same demeanor. I mean, there's so many polarities, and so it just doesn't feel very real. If I know that you know 20% of me very well and you like that, but you probably judge this or can't stand that, and you don't even know that you don't know it, it just doesn't feel very real. And so I really like the depth of engagement that I have with my sweetheart. I also learned about chauvinism. And I learned about the way that my culture has attacked my feminine since birth, that my parents have attacked my feminine educationally, etc., in career, that my entire country has attacked my feminine since birth. So my feminine is in a lot of pain and needs balance and healing, and I need to come back to center, which is why I picked one of the most feminine women from one of the most feminine countries in the world. And it's why I've been healing my feminine by adoring and caring and protecting hers. And this brings both of us back to center. So these are some of the things that I've been learning in my education, and I consider all of them deeply relevant to a successful marriage. I would add in one final thing from Robert Bly, who commented that if a woman does not create art, the marriage is dead. Now, this can be a variety of forms of art, whether dance and yoga or painting and drawing or poetry or singing. But if a woman does not create art, if the soul, if the feminine in the relationship doesn't sing in some way, the relationship dies. The magic will die. And partly, just noticing my own behavior and knowing my love languages and technologies, I would say that one of the other things that's been useful in addition to the ending agreement is I ask partners to give me a list of 30 things that would help them feel completely and totally loved were I to buy, do, be those things. And I prod them into a level of 4K clarity by going into imagination and contextualizing. So if I bought you flowers like this, if I did like this, you know, what music was, what makes you feel loved? What does a day look like in beauty and transcendence for you? It's a very important part. And I give that information. So in the art arena, I bought Jen paints. I encouraged her business of custom one-of-a-kind greeting cards with three-dimensional art. I asked her in my list of ways to be loved to make me cards, to make me poems, to have pastel flowers, to give me flowers, to appreciate me when I do this and do this, to honor what I'm doing, what I'm saying, the many things I do to bring her reality into a blossoming, to appreciate them regularly, every few hours. The abundance of things that I provide and create, to honor those by showing the happiness that it brings. And so this has been, you know, if you may or may not see around, but this house is covered in over 100 art creations. Some we've done together, some we write poems back and forth, and this keeps the relationship alive. Dreams, listening to her dreams. I learned very quickly that she would tell me certain things through her dreams she didn't feel comfortable saying directly. But dreams don't lie. And so understanding that we are all parts of a dream, understanding that they talk about relationships. You know, if she was running from a man in the dream, it's like, okay, so what part is some part of you running from in me? What part is some part in me running from you? How can we learn and respond? Listening to dreams, in other words, is a key and healing technology. Deep meditation, and finally, I would say microdosing. Giving Jen a small amount of LSD and MDMA after a year of therapy, trauma type stuff. In other words, we did healing, we did inner child work, we did a year of journaling, we did paintings, we did discussions, we talked about trauma, we released it, we did deep body healings. And Jen is now fluent and skilled in the art of integrating and healing trauma. Now, psychedelics, even in small doses, dissolve boundaries, which means that deep repressed emotions can come up, positive and negative. And so it's very important, the timing. But 2 or 3 very small dose sessions where it was about honoring her in her space, etc., was liberating for her, getting a sense of who she is beyond her programming, who she is as a being. Very powerful. For me also. LSD, psilocybin, DMT, MDMA, all non-addictive, all opening up different facets of the psyche, learning to integrate that with having spent over $150,000 on various healing and therapy, having gone to seminars, having done more than 1,000 hours of meditation, yoga, etc., having written numbers of books. I have a backdrop of tools to integrate that information into my life in a powerful way. And I would say that that's been very important, working with crystals and healing at times, doing healing massage to work through elements of the PTSD, also very healing and powerful. So these are the technologies that together are creating a stunning transformative relationship. And I share these technologies with you as a path, along with a thought that I'm working with and have created with Jen and I in our life, and also my assistant. We all work less than 4 hours a day. Jen, myself, and my assistant. And we spend another, some time a day giving, creating, loving, etc. And we have some personal time, and we have playtime. And enormous abundance is created with this template. And were it not for the fanaticism and the vast expense of way overkill housing in many cases, this is a very easy and natural rhythmic tradition of our ancestors. Whether it's Native American Indians, whether it's different tribes in the Amazon, there's about 4 hours every day spent in ritual, in emotion, in socializing and engaging with the group. There's time spent alone, and there's time preparing the camp, gathering the food. We are the only culture that works these 12-hour days and commuting and doing all this bizarre stuff, making all ends of money for these huge houses we're hardly ever in. We're the only ones doing that. And it does not bring us to center in the same way that if we spend 4 hours a day on our heart and our emotions and our relationships, 4 hours a day on our inner world, and 4 hours a day being of service and contributing to the outer world, in action in our body, it creates an aliveness, an abundance that many of us have lost. I am excited as a human being that's been pushed this way and failed hundreds and hundreds of times to succeed at this level of beauty, doing it the way that I'm told, to define that it's so easy using these technologies that are available to all of us. We just put our hearts, our souls, our spirits first. I want to bless you. Bless you on the next step, the journey to taking a little piece of this into your reality, letting it touch those in your life, able and willing to be touched with some of your love.